What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Field Stormers. It's been a while. It's been some time. We've kind of let a lot of things play out. I think the last time we talked was before rivalry weekend was kind of the last conversation we had. We've had conference championships, all that, a lot of news, the NIL, the portal, early national signing day, all that stuff. We're not going to get into everything as far as what's been missed since our last conversation. But at the same time, we are going to talk about a lot because it is bowl season, but we're not going to sit here and bore you with some of the bowl games that you don't care about, because a lot of the bowl games that had a lot of implications and got the college football world buzzing again have been played, and the college football playoffs is going to be happening tomorrow. It's New Year's Eve, so happy New Year to everybody out there tuning in and listening. We appreciate you. As always, I'm your host, Mo Murphy, with my co-host, Walker Bailey, in the building. Walker, what's going on, bro? Oh, and he cut out at this second. Had a little bit of Wi-Fi problem, so we're going to sit here and figure this out. But we do appreciate everybody for tuning in. We do appreciate everybody for listening. And Walker is back in the building, I think, or we might have to figure some things out, but we'll figure it out as we go until Walker pops back up on the stream, which he is not there currently at this moment. Technical difficulties. It would happen coming into the new year, but the college football bowl season is here. Bowl season has been played. A few teams have looked good. A few teams have looked really bad. A la Ohio State and Florida State are really the talking point of looking terrible in these bowl games. And I'm sure we'll talk about that. But you know what, Walker? Walker's back in the building. I don't have to improvise. I wasn't ready for it, but we here. Walker, let's talk about Ole Miss for a second. We're going to talk about our teams, but let's talk about Ole Miss for a second. So, like I said, in between the last time we talked, a lot has happened. And obviously, one of the biggest stories in college football, outside of these bowl games being played and takeaways and what teams are looking like moving forward, is the fact that Ole Miss has dominated the transfer portal. And Ole Miss has dominated the headlines when some of these meaningless, and I guess most of these bowl games have been meaningless essentially, but I think it was a fair kind of look into next year. That's how I look at it. Like Ohio State, we'll talk about them in a little bit, but I look at it like it's a fair assessment of what you can expect for next year and see where you need to improve and where your biggest issues are. I think that's what these bowl games are, especially for those top tier teams that are playoff or bust. Like these games, like you saw with the Rose Bowl, like a couple of years ago when CJ Stroud and Jackson Smith and Jigba and Marvin Harrison Jr. went nuts in the Rose Bowl. Like there was a lot to be excited for if you're an Ohio State fan. That was one of the best meaningless bowl games that we've seen in the playoff era as well. So you were able to get some entertainment, but it was more so a look to next year. It's not about winning or losing necessarily for some of these teams. But Ole Miss has absolutely dominated the transfer portal. So, I mean, the floor is yours. Wherever you want to start with Ole Miss, I'll be here. I'll narrate. I'll weigh in. But we're starting with your team. The floor is yours.
I mean, you said it. They've gone and gotten legitimate production from SEC schools. Like, in the past, they've gotten production from the G5 level and then basically have counted on it to kind of translate it to the higher level. Not this year. This year, they've gone and gotten guys like Walter Nolan, Tyler Barron. They went and got – I'm not going to try to pronounce the kid from Florida's name, but Princely that plays defensive end. They've gotten key production on all of it, or not all of it, but most of it on the line of scrimmage, almost all of it on defense at the SEC and the Big Ten level, which is levels that translate to winning at a really, really high level, a national championship type of level. And they've gotten it at all three levels on defense. I don't think they're done. I think they're going to keep adding. But, and then when you factor in all the returning production, Jackson Dart, he hasn't announced it yet, but he's going to be back. Quinshon Judkins is going to be back. Trey Harris is going to be back. Caden Prescorn, who was the breakout star in the bowl game yesterday with 100 and some odd receiving yards and 2 touchdowns, he's going to be back. They're going to kind of fix the offensive lineup in the transfer portal. And it looks like a team that legitimately, for the first time probably in my lifetime, can legitimately say, hey, we're a national title contender. You've got to deal with us.
Let me ask you, are they the scariest team? Because I believe they are. I think they're the scariest team going into next year. I think they're going to be the hardest team to evaluate
Yeah.
As far as where you put them in preseason rankings, and you guys like you and me talk about preseason rankings don't mean the most, but I think they're going to be hard because I think when you're sitting here looking at preseason rankings, like if you want me to be honest, you could easily justify that Ole Miss should walk into next season being considered a top 5 team, right?
Yeah. Well, it's hard. Like
it'd be tough to put them there because they got a lot of production that you expect. Like there are some returning players, Jackson Dart and Judkins. Like there are Trey Harris. There's some returning players that you expect high level production, but you still look at them as like, okay, if all these guys are returning, I still see this being a 10-2, 9-3 team. But now you talk about where they attacked in the portal, and you're like, yo, this team is loaded from top to bottom. Maybe not deep, but at every position they got a guy. At every position, from linebacker, D-line, corner, like they have a guy at every position that you need to have to where you're like, bro, this is one of the top 5 most talented rosters entering next year. Yeah. Granted, we don't know what these playoff teams are going to do. We don't know who's coming back for Bama or Michigan or Texas. We know Washington's losing a lot. That's the expectation. A lot of their star players are going to be gone because their time's up. So now I'm looking at Ole Miss and I'm thinking like, bro, this is arguably the most dangerous team entering into next year because as good as they were this year, I guess you could say, I don't think they fell short of expectations, but as good as they were this year,
I think they maximized
to be damn good next year. And you're talking about improve it. They might get Evan Stewart. Yeah. Like there's still that possibility that you could just be absolutely loaded at wide receiver. You got Walter Nolan, like everything you said. So as an Ole Miss fan and being really like, you're not just a fan. Like you're also attached to the rumors. You understand. You kind of know some things that are cooking behind the scenes before they happen. So, like, you're really dialed in with Ole Miss. So, it's more than just talking to a fan. So, is the expectation next year, like, as Ole Miss and as Rebel Nation, y'all kind of expect to be the scariest team in college football next year?
I said the goal needs to be to host a playoff game because, I mean, that means you competed for an SEC championship. You went toe-to-toe with, like, the Alabamas and the Georgias. Now, they don't play Alabama. So, that means you match their results over the course of a season. You expect to be similar to those teams. You play Georgia and Oxford, like, this year in Athens, that was a 52-17 finish. That shouldn't happen again. Like, you may not win the game, but it should be, a knockdown drag out where if it goes to the playoff, you should be able to expect to line up and compete the next time you see them. I think, we talked about it a lot, like, and you talked about preseason stuff. Like I said this about a different topic. We'll see kind of once the spring is over, because I think you have to let rosters fill out and see how they like what it looks like post spring, post that second portal window. But I have a hard time, and like not even from a fan perspective, but I have a hard time finding 5 teams where I'm like, yeah, their roster's better. And then the other thing with Ole Miss too is like, you get all these proven commodities out of the portal on the D line, but what people don't realize is like, they signed 4 blue chip D linemen, including a 5-star. So, like, if you get any freshman contributions on the D line, and you may not need them, but if you get them and any of them are ready, you're like 6 deep on the D line with 4 or 5-star talent. And like that is the conversation where when we talk about the gap between like Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, and the rest of the country, that is the gap. That's where the gap is. That's where
the gap's being closed. Like the gap that's being closed.
That's where the gap has been between teams like, Ole Miss, Penn State, and that second tier, and like the Blue Bloods. Like that's where the gap has been. It's offensive line, defensive line. Everybody can get, let's be honest, like a lot of people have the receivers that can go make plays. Like a lot of people can find like a really competent quarterback.
And there's great wide receivers in this country right now. Like when you look at recruiting,
there has never been more good receivers than there is today. Like
no, because I mean you're talking about like not to get on the NFL, but I mean you're talking about taking. Let's just say I could really go down the line. I'm not going to, but I would say there's 10 to 12 wide receivers that are draft eligible right now that could justifiably be first round picks. Now, granted, are 10 to 12 wide receivers going to go in the first round? Probably not.
No.
But guys that go in that early second, late second, maybe even early fall to early third, because there's that many talented wide receivers that you don't have to reach early and still can get the same type of talent. That's how loaded the wide receiver position is in college football right now.
Yeah.
It translates over to the NFL because as great, we've had some elite wide receivers throughout history, right? But as far as just the position in itself and how valuable it is in football, and whether you want to devalue and say they shouldn't be getting paid what they're getting paid in the NFL, that's a conversation for another day. But the fact is, wide receivers are getting paid what they're getting paid now and projected from here on out, the next group, the CeeDee Lambs and all that, because of how talented the position is in football right now. Like, that's arguably, I think they're the point guard. I think they're the point guard. They're equivalent to the point guard of 2 to 3 years ago of the NBA. Like, I think when you look at wide receivers just in football, you look at point guard was like the deepest position in the NBA. I think that's where wide receiver is. We're like, we don't need Steph, but like there's a spot where a guy who can win us some games like a Tyus Jones, and you're like, that could be Troy Franklin out of Oregon. Like, we know this dude is damn good and got some stock coming into the league. Like, that's how loaded this position is just in football, period. Between college and NFL, it's the most loaded position in football.
On the flip side, I think, like, I honestly think that offensive line play has never been worse. Like, I think offensive line play is significantly down from what it's been in the past. And so, like, that's why I think the gap has been so big, because now, like, if you're a legitimate blue chip NFL caliber offensive lineman, you're going to all the same places. You're going to, oh God, no. I had that yesterday. He was so awful.
We're going to talk about that too. We is going to have a conversation. I was working while this conversation was going on, and I got some thoughts.
All the NFL caliber offensive linemen, you know, they end up at LSU, they end up at Alabama, they end up at Georgia, because they know that's where they can get developed and go to the league, and they get paid. Like, and that's fine. But now, like, what you're starting to see is like, and I'll bring another school into this too, because, well, you watched them the other night. Ole Miss and Missouri have somehow started convincing, and not somehow, it's an NIL thing. They're very, very organized in NIL, and they have now started to get these players to come to their schools. Ole Miss and Missouri have started to convince these blue chips, hey, you can do the same thing here that you can do there, and the kids believe them. And so they're taking their checks and they're going and playing, and these programs are starting to elevate. Because look, all this same conversation we're having about Ole Miss, you can have it to a lesser extent about Missouri. Now, Missouri is not as good at quarterback, and they haven't dominated the portal the same way, but they still finished with the same exact record. They won a bowl game. They went 11-2. Like, it's the same thing. Like, they're going to be a preseason top 10 team, and they've earned it because most of their roster is coming back. Luther Burden's going to be back.
He's coming back.
Yeah, he's back.
That's big.
Yeah, no, I mean, and it sounds like they're going to get. It sounds like they're going to get Theo Weiss back too. So that
he
sounds like
against Ohio State a few plays too. He had some good plays in that bowl game. We'll talk about.
Yeah,
that.
like Theo. Yeah, like so Theo. It sounds like Theo is going to be back too. And then, like, really all they'll lose is Cody Schrader. But you know how I feel about running backs. So, I think that's production that you'll be able to replace. And so, I mean, they've got, they'll be able to add and get better. I think you're starting to see that the teams who, and when the rules changed, that immediately dove in face first and said, we're going to embrace this model. It may suck and we may not agree with it, but we're going to embrace it to the fullest and play with it. They're elevating and they're getting better. Like, that's why Ole Miss and Missouri now, like, they have legitimate cases that they're going to get to play home playoff games next year and compete for an SEC championship and compete for a national championship because they've elevated their roster. Like, the only SEC team that you can hands down on paper say going into next season is better than Ole Miss is Georgia. That's the only one that you can look at and be like, that team's better than Ole Miss. And I would say, and I'd tell you, yeah, Georgia's better than Ole Miss. But other than that, I would say everybody else, it's either a conversation or there's no conversation. Ole Miss is better than them. And I would say the only ones you really have a conversation about is like Alabama, Missouri, and maybe LSU if they figure the portal thing out. But it's not a conversation right now.
Right. Yeah, it's not. Like, it's not. LSU is kind of expected to take a step back.
Brian Kelly doesn't like the portal at all. You can tell. Like,
and they're losing the majority of their production. And so to lose your quarterback, your two best wide receivers, to lose a lot to the league or whatever it may be, and then not being big on the portal. I think any coach that's not big on the portal. Yeah, you can't win. My thing is, bro, you can't win a national championship without attacking the portal. And I know everybody wants to be like the convenient of like, well, you still need young guys. Yes, you do. But at the same time, like, let's talk about the advantage that Ole Miss has over certain other teams is the fact, okay, maybe we don't have 10 4 or 5-star freshmen coming in. But like we look at that to max out that kind of production from them, we're looking at them developing, and towards the end of their sophomore year, they look like star potential, and then they become superstars their junior year. Like that's when you start, okay, that's the draft eligible guys. But then when you attack the transfer portal and you get the Walter Nolan that you about to have for 2 years, when you possibly, there's a possibility that you get Evan Stewart. There's a lot of guys that you're getting out of the portal that are like, okay, they only got 2 years instead of 3 years, but they have a year experience in college football and they've proven that they could do it at that level. So now they come here and we got ready-made guys with experience. You get that advantage of that freshman year that's, unless you're just that outstanding, like a lot of them big schools, like your freshmen don't play a lot because everybody got 5-star freshmen coming in that really the expectation is more of a red shirt type of year. And then you ball out your sophomore year. And then that's when you turn yourself into a superstar. You become a superstar your junior year, and then you go to the NFL. Like that's kind of the track of how it works for these 5-star players, that play in college football. And so looking at Ole Miss being able to attack the portal, like people are like, well, I think this is a sport now where it's a very year by year basis thing. And I don't think you need to attack it and think about 3 years down the line where, like I look at it like that 2016 recruiting class for Ohio State. Like the expectation was they will win the national championship because of how good they are coming in. Like that recruiting class, even the Marvin Harrison Jr. recruiting class was like, okay, in the next 3 years, this team should win a national championship. They haven't, right? But you look at it and be like, if you get ready-made players and you're not thinking about developing everybody and all your freshmen got to be developed, that's the way to win. And if you don't like the transfer portal, like you might get left behind. Like NIL and transfer portal is going to leave some teams behind. You're kind of seeing it with Clemson. It's possible that you're seeing it with LSU. If you don't love the transfer portal, you might get left behind because it's benefiting Ole Miss. It's benefiting Missouri. It's benefiting these teams that could go 10-2, 11-1, compete to win the conference. And now you're talking about these New Year's 6 games are now playoff games. Like this is no longer meaningless bowl games. Matchups like this are now playoff games. And I know the matchups would change based on ranking. So it wouldn't be Ohio State versus Missouri. It wouldn't be Ole Miss versus Penn State. But those type of games, those New Year's 6 games are now playoff games. And you're talking about teams maximizing the potential. And now we can all sell. It's not just Ohio State and Georgia and Bama and enter Michigan in that now after the past 3 years of winning the Big Ten championship and making the playoffs. Like it's not those same 4 or 5 teams that are like, oh, if you don't play for us, you probably won't go to the playoffs or your chances deplete significantly. Now all these teams are playoff type teams. Like every New Year's 6 team plays in the playoffs this year. Like next year, these would be the playoff teams. So I think with having that selling point is also why, like, you don't need to stand in line and wait at Ohio State. You don't need to stand in line and wait at Bama or Georgia. You could come to Ole Miss, play right away, and compete at the highest level. Like now you're talking about these are playoff teams next year. And once you get to the playoffs, in any sport, all you need to do is make it to the dance. At that point, anything can happen. Like once you make it to the dance, anything can happen. All we got to do, we just got to play better than you that day. This is football. This ain't basketball where it's a 7-game series and more often than not, the better team wins. This is all I got to do is be better than you on one Saturday. That's it. It is very possible for a team like Ole Miss to do that, but I don't want to keep talking about Ole Miss because there's a conversation, and we're not going to talk about Ohio State yet, but there's a conversation about this Florida State-Georgia game. It really got me a little pissed off, right? Because people think the committee is now justified for not putting Florida State in. Florida State doesn't get in, who sits? Literally probably their 10 best players. Obviously, we knew they were missing their quarterback regardless, and that was the biggest reason why they didn't get in. They don't get in, no Keon Coleman, no Johnny Wilson, no Trey Benson. Their best defensive end that's going to the NFL doesn't play. I mean, we could go through the list of Georgia and Florida State players who didn't play in that game. So now you're talking about the definition of a true meaningless bowl game, but Georgia had enough returning talent that's expected to play next year to absolutely dominate Florida State. The first very simple question I'm going to ask you is, if this was a playoff game, is the score 63-3? If this was a playoff game, if this game mattered, does the score is this what you think the game turns out to be? Because I don't think so.
No, it's not. They wouldn't have beaten any of the 4 playoff teams, but they weren't losing 63-3. And if they're fully, and if Travis is healthy, like, then they definitely don't lose 63-3. Like, and I think the case that got made, someone said like yesterday, I'm not gonna say his name, but like someone's like, oh, Florida State was the most overrated team in all of college football. Why? How are they over? How do you get overrated by winning every game you play? What can you do other than beat every single team on your schedule? Like, and it's not like they didn't play anybody. Like, you win the road game at Clemson, which is not not an easy place to win. Never has been. Never will be. You beat LSU by 3 touchdowns. Like, I mean, I don't know what else. Like, I don't know what else they could have done. Like, I understand why they got left out, and I understand that for the product, it's going to make it better. To take yesterday and use it as an endorsement for why they didn't get in is just stupid. It's dumb.
And I think, like, just for the simple fact of both teams had so many missing into the portal and not played due to going to the NFL. Like, it wasn't just Florida State. Georgia was missing players too. But I think Florida State was missing. When you think about, if you just go down the line of who didn't play, okay, Brock Bowers didn't play. We understand that. Like, he's the best player on Georgia. But, like, Florida State was missing probably their 10 best players easily.
Dude, they were missing. I saw a tweet, and I'll give credit. I can't remember the exact number, but Bud Elliott tweeted it. I think they were missing 17 out of 22 starters. And then you're also on the third string quarterback. And so, like, to use that as a case for why Florida State shouldn't have been in the playoff, like, to be honest, that wasn't even Florida State yesterday. Like, that's not even the same team. It's like a completely different roster than the group that we saw play. Now, if you want to watch that and be like, like, hell, Florida State's in trouble next year, fine. Like, that's okay. Like, because the depth pieces got beat by 60 by Georgia. But, I think if you're looking for that game, like the message out of that game, it's the difference in culture at a place like Georgia and Alabama, where last year Bryce Young and Will Anderson played that Sugar Bowl game, and this year Georgia had pretty much everybody play their bowl game. That's the difference. It's the culture where everybody plays and nobody opts out of those bowl games at places like that. Where not the like, if you're taking, oh, well, Florida State was overrated, Florida State shouldn't have been in the playoff from that game yesterday, where none of the players that played the regular season really played yesterday, you're a complete imbecile. You are an absolute
fired.
Yeah, an absolute moron. Like, I mean, there's like, that's just, I don't know. You can't, like, if I ran out, that's like watching the Cowboys run out yesterday with Dak Prescott and the full roster, and then next week, because like they run out and start Trey Lance and some kid out of the stands at receiver, and being like, see, I told you the Cowboys sucked because the 8-year-old in the stands can't catch a pass in an NFL game. It's like, no, that's stupid. Like, or like Tulane playing their second string against somebody in the Cotton Bowl. Like, that's dumb. It's nonsensical. It doesn't even begin to like agree with, like, that's not even barely logical. I don't know. It bothered me. I get that the cool thing to do was everybody dunking on Florida State, and everybody wanted to do the, oh, rah, committee got it right, this, that, and the other. You can think the committee got it right without yesterday being like the point. Like the point.
Yeah, I don't think yesterday was an indictment for the simple fact of understanding who didn't play in that game. Like,
no, like I think like if you pulled up the list of just everybody who didn't play, like I know for sure Trey Benson didn't play, Keon Coleman didn't play, Johnny didn't play, Jordan Travis didn't play.
Verse, he didn't play.
Verse didn't play. Like all those guys that were out, like over the course of yesterday. If you think that that's the same, like if you think that the result is the same if all those guys play, you're a legitimate delusional moron, and you need to like have mom make you a ham sandwich or something. Like that's stupid as hell.
Yeah, like I just find it crazy that was the buzz was like, okay, as soon as, Florida State gets kicked, it's like, oh, see, here come all the, and shout out to Stu, because, I'm going to put a name on it. I was working while this conversation was going on, so I more was like, I had my headphones in and just kind of sitting there laughing with some of the responses and just the basis point of the argument. But I don't want to like get into that too much. You know what? Let's talk about my team, man. It's time. It's time we talk about Ohio State. Before we talk about the play, I got a lot to say. I'm not going to say everything that I have to say about Ohio State, but I do think, and shout out to Chris for watching the show. 63-3, it's nasty. But the context of it, of understanding who was playing for the other team, that even if you felt like they were overrated all year, This overrated team is missing their 10 best players. 17 starters are sitting out. You go down the list and you're like, bro, these are all their impact players. Like, so, I mean, you know, whatever the takeaway is from that, so be it. If you're on the side that the committee was justified because of that ass whooping, and that's fine. You know, stay on that side. I don't believe that be the case. I don't believe that be the final score if both teams actually play this game healthy. And I think yesterday was more of an indictment of why the playoffs needed to be expanded, because you needed to make these games matter. And they don't. They just don't. These games just do not matter. And so you get the result of 17 players enter the portal for Georgia. You get the result of 17 of your 22 starters at Florida State are not playing in this game. And you kind of get to see what you have for next year, but you clearly see your depth is kind of bad. But I do want to talk about Ohio State. So Ohio State loses.
Hey, I'll say this too real quick. Notice how like nobody shit on Tulane when their coach left and half their roster got in the portal and they got beat by 3 touchdowns in their bowl game. Like nobody used that as an indictment of Tulane. Like, why is this all of a sudden?
And this could have been a team that like realistically could have been in the playoffs.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, had this been the playoff year, like this could have been a playoff team. So
they were one game from being the G5 representative. They won the AAC championship game. They were going to be the G5 representative, and they were going to play against Oregon in the Fiesta Bowl. Like, and that would have been their second straight New Year's Six game. But their coach leaves and their roster leaves and all that stuff, and nobody used that as an indictment against them. I guess like they weren't overrated. Nobody had anything to say about them. But then Florida State's players are out, and all of a sudden it's this justification. Oh, they're overrated. They suck. This, that, and the other.
Yeah. So I want to talk about Ohio State. All right, they lost 14-3 to Missouri. Rough watch. If you're an Ohio State fan, it was a tough watch.
As a neutral, it was a brutal.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say, like, as a fan of neither team that just wanted to watch the bowl game and thought like this Sugar Bowl, like it was supposed to be a good bowl game. Like, or Cotton Bowl. I said Sugar Bowl, Cotton Bowl.
It was supposed to be a fun game on a fast track.
Yeah, it was supposed to be a high scoring game. Take the over. Like Missouri's offense go put up some points. Maybe Devin Brown looks good, and I think that's the thing is my indictment on the Ryan Day situation. And I know everybody's like kicking Ryan Day's back in, and I'm not saying that he should be fired. I will say he is on the hot seat, and he has the type of schedule next year where a parting of ways could be justified. Like you play Oregon, you play Michigan, you got Penn State. Like you have enough games on your schedule where if you don't win all of those or majority of them, like you could cough up and lose to Oregon or Penn State if you walk into that Michigan 10-1 and you win that game at home, right? Like it's going to be at home. So like you could justify a loss early in the season, especially because, you know, like being a one-loss team that has an opportunity to win the Big Ten championship, you would be a playoff team. So you could justify a loss. But what I saw in that Missouri game was I saw a lack of players being prepared. And that falls on coaches. When players aren't prepared, like, okay, Devin Brown goes down, right? He didn't look that good before he went down. So it's not like, oh, this was the absolute result of losing our quarterback and being on our third string quarterback. Because at the same time, you know what you saw? Like, okay, this guy had all year to be ready. He had all year to be improved. And I'm not saying he's trash because the offensive line played absolutely horrible. This dude had no time to throw the ball. So it's not an indictment on him, but he also looked unprepared. And it looked like Ohio State had no plans of this dude playing in the game at all. There was no preparation of what if Devin Brown goes down. There was no preparation of anything. You could tell because before they put Kineholz out there on the field, they left Devin Brown injured. And for the first 2 plays after injury, they run direct snaps to Travion Henderson. And then they run a pass play, leaving a Devin Brown who's supposed to be mobile, compromised because he's now injured, to get absolutely murdered because he can't move out of the pocket and he got killed and his offensive line was not playing good. So I just think it was a lack of preparation for Ohio State. And I think, like, bro, I really do think Ryan Day is on the hot seat next year. And I want to talk about your stance on it, because if he's not, and if there's not a possibility that basically some expectations need to be set for Ryan Day of like, look, bro, we do love you, but there's a bar and this is the bar. And whatever these are the this is what you need to meet. These are the expectations for next year. Maybe it's not a national championship, but you need to lay some foundation of this is the expectation. If you do not meet that, you might not have a job with Ohio State. We might mutually part ways. You might leave for something else, but there needs to be an understanding of what the true expectation is going on the next year, or else I think we end up in what you think, which I'm going to give you the floor to say if that's not, because I think you agree with me, if that sit down and that laying expectations doesn't happen, then what happens in 2 to 3 years is what you're about to say. Like the possibility of what you think is a possibility if you don't sit down and have that conversation.
Yeah, it's like I told you earlier. I don't think they're in danger of ever becoming Nebraska or Tennessee or anything. But I think the possibility but the possibility that they become Oklahoma is definitely a very real thing, which like Oklahoma hasn't been a real threat to win a national title in a really long time. And that doesn't mean that they're bad. Like they're pretty consistently in New Year's Six bowls. They're 10-2.
They're consistently 10-2, 11-1.
And they've been they get in the playoff every now and then, but then when they got in the playoff under Lincoln Riley, they didn't win those games. I think Ohio State, in a weird way, could be in danger of heading to that place if they don't kind of get this thing back on the track. Now, granted, I will say this. If a kick goes about 6 inches to the right last year, we're having a completely different conversation.
We are. And that's where I was having an argument with my own
board. Like, you hate to, but with that being said, the kick didn't go that way. And in order for it not to go that way, Ohio State did have to blow a 14-point lead. Like, and not to reopen old wounds and all that, but like, I mean, they did have to completely blow that game for that to get that way. And so, I think they're in danger of that. And on paper next year, and again, it's hard. You don't want to evaluate. They've literally played their bowl game 2 nights ago. They haven't, but again, like, not to bring Ole Miss back into it, but like they could have attacked the portal already. Like Ole Miss didn't wait until after their bowl game to hit the portal. Like they hit the portal and then played their bowl game and then got done, and now they're going to go hit the portal again.
Leave the hopes that understanding that what you saw from the bowl game performance on top of what you have coming back and coming in next year, you feel really great about next year, like justifiably so. Like when you're playing in what we call these meaningless bowl games, then the eyes should be on next year. And I think Ohio State did that with like all right, we're going to let Devin Brown play. And, okay, I think that was their point of like, maybe we need to see now if we don't need a quarterback. But I think like you should have grabbed a quarterback because the worst case scenario for Ohio State happened.
The rumor out in the college football world was that Will Howard was ready to commit to Ohio State.
He was a silent commit the night of, and the expectation was basically that he was going to commit the next morning after the game. To not distract from the game.
Yes. And so I think that's probably how that ends up going. And I think Will Howard's fine, but like that's not your typical like Ohio State.
I think he's good enough. He's better than what we have.
He's an upgrade on McCord, but he's not Dwayne Haskins or
Fields or Stroud or or JT Barrett. Like he's not that.
Somewhere in between. Is Will Howard the difference between beating Michigan this year and not? Maybe. I mean, I don't know. It's impossible to say, really. Does Will Howard get better with better weapons and a more dynamic system? Maybe. I have no idea. He plays in kind of a funky system in Manhattan. So, but I mean, that's kind of where they're at, though, like because they were so kind of slow and like they didn't really, I guess, Cam Ward, they either didn't want or couldn't get the figure high enough for him. I don't know, but they've kind of passed on a lot of these guys, and so now here we are. Like you got Will Howard, and then there was some Jackson Arnold rumblings yesterday and the day before, but I kind of skeptical on that. I don't know. Like it's just been weird. They weren't very good up front on the offensive line this year.
And it showed in that Missouri game because, boy, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, Missouri.
Horrible. That's the worst showing all year. Like, I'll say this. The offensive line started off bad. They looked like they started getting some things together, and they put it together. Able to beat Notre Dame, able to beat Penn State. Okay, you lose to Michigan, but you kind of like maybe this team just wasn't good enough. All right, fair assessment. Still 11-1. But like an opportunity, and here's why I say Ohio State people could say this was a meaningless game for Ohio State, but I don't think so. And I say this, look at the opt-outs. Like that goes to tell you what the game means for a team is when you look at the opt-outs. Who opted out? Marvin Harrison. Okay, we knew that. Tommy Eichenberg. Okay, we expected that. Other than that, JTT plays, Mike Hall plays, Emeka Ibuka plays. Like, I mean, all down, Denzel Burke plays, Travion Henderson plays. Like, all the guys that could have opted out because they're thinking about coming back or they're thinking about going to the NFL, but either way, this bowl game does nothing for them. They all opted in to play in this game because the sour taste that Michigan left in their mouth, pause, by beating them, they was like, we don't want to go out like that. We want to go out with a win. Whether we decide to go to the NFL or not, this class just can't go out like that. And then they continue to go out that way. And I think you end up keeping players because of that. But I still think bringing back all these players from this roster that it's possible we bring back Henderson, Ibuka, JTT, Jack Sawyer, Denzel Burke. You go down the line of those juniors that are talking about coming back. But at the same time, like the problems from this past season still exist, even with all of them coming back. They weren't the problem. The guys coming back was not the issue. We didn't have a major issue at corner. Jordan Hancock and Denzel Burke held it down. We weren't getting shredded down the field all season. JTT and Jack Sawyer, they could have been a little bit better. They could have put a little more pressure on the quarterback, but they did what they were supposed to do. JTT had his flashes throughout the season. Jack Sawyer had a flash here or there. I don't think he ever amounted to the expectation of what he should have been because he should have been you got Nick Bosa and Joey Bosa and Chase Young. And so you thought like, okay, the lineage of elite defensive ends at Ohio State gets back going with Jack Sawyer. Okay, that's cool. But like, even with all those guys coming back, you're still talking about like, you're still going to bring up Will Howard. You're still going to bring up the rumor of Jackson Arnold. Like, you still have a quarterback problem and you still might have a coaching problem. And I want to ask you, did you hear about the rumors of what happened with Ohio State? So
well, depends.
Did you hear about the coaches skipping practice to go to, they skipped team meetings to go to a country concert?
Oh, I know. I didn't hear that.
So that's another thing is people are mad about Ryan Day with the culture because coaches missed a meeting to go to a country concert that was happening here in Dallas. And so they missed a team meeting. And like, when you look back, that would have never happened under Jim Tressel. That would have never happened under Urban Meyer. I'm going to be honest. We don't even have to go back to Ohio State coaches. I could just go down the line, a list of coaches that are active coaches right now that would not have been an option for. And I don't even have to say Nick Saban and Kirby Smart because we know that ain't happening. But I say that doesn't happen at Ole Miss with Lane Kiffin. That doesn't happen with Lincoln Riley at USC. These guys are not missing. They're not missing meetings for a country concert because you're kind of saying this bowl game is meaningless. And it was some of your important coaches. It was your offensive coordinator. It was, Brian Hartline wasn't there. Like there were multiple coaches. Corey Dennis wasn't there. Larry Johnson wasn't there. So like, what did you come to Dallas for and play if you were your players came back and played saying this game does mean something? We don't want to go out like this, but your coaches aren't taking it as serious. Like it's a culture problem. And so I think Ryan Day has bought himself after this game. I think he's walking into this next year on the hot seat. And I think it's not a hot take. I think everybody does fully believe that. But if he's not, then it could be the downfall of Ohio State and they do turn into that Oklahoma because if you keep him for the next 2 to 3 years, what you've seen this past 3 years, you're very similar to Oklahoma. You're really good. You're probably not good enough to win a national championship. If you could beat Michigan, then you could win your conference and maybe sneak in and have an opportunity to play a competitive playoff game, or you lose to Michigan and things fall in your favor and you get to play a competitive game against Georgia. Like that's where you're at. But outside of that, like these aren't the world beaters that you're used to. And I'm sorry to say, like, to look at it like this. Let's look at 2019. Let's look at the roster. He was handed, right? Like, let's say, Jim Harbaugh said he was handed on third base. Okay, let's look at that roster. One of the best secondaries a college football team has ever had. Like, as far as depth, I start naming the names, you'd be like, damn. That 2019 Ohio State team that lost to Clemson was damn good. So was that Clemson team. And then that LSU team that won the national championship was just 2 levels above both of them. But that's arguably one of the greatest teams that college football played. But then you look at 2019 and the strengths of that team that could have possibly played for a national championship, and you beat Clemson, you're in the national championship. I don't think they beat LSU, but you still sitting there like, we made it. We had an opportunity, whatever. All those major positions that contributed to that team being damn good have all depleted. We don't have the secondary we had. We don't have the D-line we had. We don't have the quarterback we had. The only thing that we have is we got these flashy receivers that looks good and get you a top 3 recruiting class you get to talk about. Ohio State is nothing but a bunch of flashy receivers, if you want me to be honest. Their recruiting class has been sitting on the fact of Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Ibuka, Julian Fleming, what's his name that committed now? What's his name? Jeremiah Smith. Like, this list of these Brandon Ennis, like, that's what your recruiting class holds on to. Your wide receiver room is absolutely amazing. It's cute. But guess what? It's not going to win you a national championship, and you're only going to take a few steps back. And with the portal and having to re-recruit players, you have to look on the up and up, or these guys will leave for an opportunity easily. Because you have to keep re-recruiting your players. Just because Jeremiah Smith is there as a freshman doesn't mean he stays there as a sophomore. And if he sees another team like an Ole Miss with better opportunity, on top of they'll give me more NIL money, there's better opportunity. I think the system fits me more, and they're winning games, and they're on the up and up while we're heading downwards. I think that matters. Like, I think that matters for Ohio State.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Like, it's a crucial year. I mean, it's a make or break type year. And right now the roster on paper looks like one that's going to be probably good enough to get into the playoff, but not good enough to compete for a national title. Like, they look like, honestly, like right now, they look like the 10th to 12th best team in the country.
Yeah, like even going into next year. Going into next year, I think they're the best team in the country. And I know some people kind of get on, let's say, like some people get on Ohio State, like what's the expectation, right? But like the expectation is to win the Big Ten and compete for a national championship. That's the standard. And some people are like, it's starting to fall off as maybe that's an unrealistic standard. So then, okay, let's say you say that, then why is it unrealistic? Because it wasn't unrealistic when Urban Meyer was there. Nobody said the bar was set too high for Urban Meyer to think that, hey, bare minimum, you need to win the Big Ten championship and make the playoffs. That was bare minimum for Urban Meyer, was you need to win the Big Ten championship and make the playoffs. That is bare minimum. That is the floor of what Ohio State should be. And here, make an appearance in the national championship. And I've defended Ryan Day. Don't get me wrong. I've been the one to be like, I'm not all the way. And I'm not all the way out on him now. I just think it's now more eye-opening that he should be in the hot seat. Like, I do think he is a hot seat coach. And I very well think if this is the type of year we have again next year and you continue on with Ryan Day, then you fall off into, based on Ohio State standards, you fall off into mediocrity. You don't want to be that team that falls off into being 10-2, 9-3 every season. Because it's hard to build back up from that. Like, when you look at Ole Miss, you're like, okay, in, year out, they're 10-2, 9-3, maybe worst case 8-4. You can build off of that when that 10-2 that 1 year turns into 11-1, and you've never really been the program where it's win your conference, make the playoffs, and we could feel like national championship or bust. They've never really been that. So when they're 10-2 and 9-3, okay, there's always positive. We could build off of it. Now, boom, Ole Miss smacks you in the face and was like, see, this 10-2 team right here could win a national championship, because their brand never fell off and the standard never really changed. It can rise, but it didn't fall. Nobody was okay with Ole Miss being 7-5, 6-6, playing in the Liberty Quest Bowl or whatever it is. Like 9-3, 10-2 was the standard. Anything less than that was failure, and we could build off of that. If Ohio State goes from 11-1 or undefeated and winning your conference and playing for a national championship as the standard to 9-3, 10-2, it's going to take a lot longer, because I could tell you, who do we see do that and fall off that way? We saw USC do it. We saw Texas do it. Those big-time brands that were winning a bunch of games, and that was the standard. When they fell off, they stayed in that and fell off big time for 10 to 15 years. It's not unrealistic. And my only thing is, if you fire Ryan Day, I don't know who would be the head coach. And that's why I'm big on not firing Ryan Day, because I don't have that answer. If I had a definitive answer, then it'd be like, okay, but I don't have an answer of where does it get better at, because he's not Kirby Smart. He's not Nick Saban. And essentially, he's not what Dabo's been. I mean, we're having 2 national championships, but he's better than anybody else. Like, he's at least on the same level or better than any other realistic candidate. He's Lincoln Riley. He's Lane Kiffin. Maybe he's not better. Maybe I think those guys are in the same tier. But like, okay, if we lose Ryan Day and bring in Lane Kiffin, like, how much better is it? I mean, if you tell me we get Lane Kiffin, I'll be cool with that. But I don't think it's realistic to say that, hey, we fire Ryan Day and hire Lane Kiffin. Like, I don't think that's realistic. He kind of screams SEC to me, and I could just see him staying at Ole Miss until Nick Saban retires and he moves on to Bama. Like, I think that's a high possibility. So, like, what is the better option? I don't think there's one out there.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it would take the right guy, and you would have to know before you fired Ryan Day that
you kind of have to do silent interviews before you just fire.
Silent interviews and kind of know who you're hiring before you fire him. You've got to know that he's going to come take the job, whoever it is. Like if it's a Dan Lanning type or something like that. Yeah, I mean it's tough. It's tough. They're in a big spot. Like these next few months are going to be critical. He's got to do well in the portal, and if there's any high school guys left on the board for February that they're after, like he needs to kind of finish the job, and they need to elevate the roster and contend for a national title next year. And like if Harbaugh leaves Michigan, like the Big Ten's going to be wide open, and there's no excuse for him not to win it.
Yeah, especially with some of these teams coming in next year, and you look at they lose a lot. Like some of these teams actually lose a lot. Some of them are, the Oregon are coming in and primed to win the Big Ten. Like they're losing Bo Nix, they're losing a couple players, but they're kind of replacing them with the portal. They're not going to have a quarterback issue. I don't think Dylan Gabriel is elite, but I say if I'm coming into the conference, I'm Oregon and I got Dylan Gabriel, I feel pretty comfortable where I'm at, especially when I look at what the possibility is of Michigan and Ohio State. I feel comfortable where I'm at. Like, is that fair to say Oregon should feel comfortable coming into the Big Ten and having an opportunity to win games?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean,
and they get their shot at Ohio State. Like they get their fair shot at Ohio State. Like and it's at Oregon, actually, but they play Ohio State next year. So like they get their fair shot to establish some dominance early.
Yeah,
which is what they do. I guess you could say is I don't want to say like unrealistic or anything, but like they have their opportunity to get their shot at Ohio State early and establish some dominance. So we'll move off of Ohio State. Before we close out, we'll talk a little bit about the college football playoffs. So it's New Year's Eve. It's kind of weird. I can't believe this is the last day of the new year, but New Year's Day. A lot of bowl games, but we'll talk about the bowl games that everybody cares about. It's the college football playoffs are happening tomorrow. It's inevitable. They are happening. They will be played. There's nothing you can do about it. The games will be played. Michigan plays Alabama. Washington plays Texas. What are your expectations for these games?
I just want to be entertained, man. Like, honestly, it's the best group of
That's all I'm looking for. I'm looking for entertainment. I want to see some elite games, like some really great games.
I'm pretty pleased with the 4 teams we've got. Like, it's probably the best group of teams we've had in a while.
And I think it's the best matchups you could have got. Like, I like Michigan versus Bama. I like Texas versus Washington. And I like the intrigue of what a national championship could look like based on the winners of those games. Like, I like the fact that, like, maybe we're all looking forward to Alabama versus Texas rematch. I think that would sell. I think everybody would love to see it. Alabama like, there'd be a big sell on no matter who wins the national championship. Like, if, let's say, hypothetically, I want Michigan to lose to Bama. I do not want to see them even have an opportunity to win the national championship. But let's say, like, Michigan plays Washington. I think you could actually get a good game, and you're getting a first-time national champ in the college football playoff era. I think that's good for expanding the playoffs and understanding that new teams can win. I think that would be good for college football as well. I think the worst team, I want to say this before I let you go. I think the worst team to win the national championship, like as far as it not being good for the sport, would be if Washington wins.
Yeah,
I think Washington would be the worst of the 4 teams to win the national championship.
Yeah, I don't know. I assume, I don't know. I'd be cool with any of them winning it.
They're just losing a lot. So the precedent of, like, if Michigan wins, I think they could build off of it. If Texas wins, it's Texas. The brand sells itself. Texas can build off of it. Obviously, if Bama wins, it just adds to the accolades for the greatest head coach of all time. Well, look at Washington. I don't think they're as primed to bounce back if they win a national championship. You look at what you're losing, that's very hard to replace, and it's still Washington at the end of the day, who's also coming to the Big Ten. So you lose a little bit of your pizzazz of what you've done over the past couple of years by entering the Big Ten.
Yeah, I think Yeah, I don't know. I just think the matchups are good. You've got like Michigan's got like an evil empire thing going on right now with all the cheating and stuff, and Texas and Washington, not new blood, but just kind of big brands that back in the playoff or whatever.
And that was a hell of a game last year in the Alamo Bowl.
Yeah,
it's the same team playing. Like both teams are pretty much the same playing. Instead of playing in the Alamo Bowl, they're competing to play for a national championship. And that Alamo Bowl game was a shootout. It was a track meet. It was very worth watching football because they had a lot of returning players and now they're competing to play for a national championship. I think that's going to be the best matchup. I love that Texas-Washington game. I don't know who wins. I'm intrigued to watch that game.
Yeah, well, and then Michigan, Alabama is where it should be. It's, the Rose Bowl. It's going to be out in the mountains with the sun setting in the background and all that stuff. All the pageantry that you want from that matchup, you're going to get. And then you'll get Texas and Washington on the fast track in New Orleans. So, I mean, it's everything you could want out of the playoff. I don't think there's a bad national championship matchup. I kind of think we're going to get Michigan-Washington. That's kind of what I think. That's not what I want. I kind of want Michigan-Texas. So I hope that's kind of what we get. But
sign me up for Bama, Texas. Sign me up for the rematch.
Yeah, I would like that. I think Michigan's going to win. I kind of have a feeling they're just going to do the whole "we have something to prove" thing. I don't know. Like I kind of have a feeling Michigan's going to roll.
So Paul Feinbaum said something that made me really think, like, to kind of go with what you're saying is like Jim Harbaugh might be going to the NFL regardless. So like a team like Michigan, if he's coaching with his back against the wall of like, it doesn't matter whether I win or lose. If I'm talking about going, like he says that makes Michigan dangerous because Jim Harbaugh could pull out all tricks to win this game because if he loses, he could go to the NFL. And if he wins and goes on to win a national championship, he still could end up going to the NFL. And the NFL looks very likely for Jim Harbaugh. So does that part, do you agree with that portion of the fact that makes Michigan more dangerous? Is because you got a lot of NFL talent. A lot of them could be leaving. You are looking to replace a lot of them. And if this is your last year there, you just go all out and you're like, win or lose, it doesn't matter what my legacy ends up being here. But I could win this game, win the national championship, still leave, and I could pull out all the tricks. Like I think Michigan's going to pull out all the tricks against Alabama. I think you're going to see double reverses, and I think you're just going to see some play calls that like Michigan hasn't had to pull them out because they've just been able to beat all their teams. And if there was a game that you thought they would, it would be against Ohio State, and they kind of did with the Donovan Wilson running back sweep, throwing the pass to the tight end down the field to open up the offense. But other than that, like I think Michigan's played very conservative and just like all we got to do is win. Because being Michigan and being undefeated and beating Ohio State was good enough to make the playoffs. You didn't question whether Michigan should get in over Florida State because you had Ohio State and Penn State on your schedule. Winning was good enough, and they kind of made that point of like, all we got to do is win, and they've done that. And so now I think everything was conservative. I think they pull out a lot of tricks against Alabama, and I think they might have to beat this Alabama team.
Yeah.
This Alabama team believes they could really win, and they should. But they really believe they could win this game. They really believe they could win the national championship, and they're coming off the biggest win of the season, beating Georgia. To secure the SEC championship, Jalen Milroe talking his shit. A lot of people, downplayed that, Bill O'Brien, he talks about how Bill O'Brien said he should play another position. So, like, a lot of these guys, a Nick Saban team with a chip on their shoulder is something scary, too. Like,
yeah, I do. I think
on their shoulder that's scary.
I think the big X factor of that game is going to be whether or not Michigan can turn Milroe over. Because early in the year, he had some problem reading coverage and would throw some really ugly interceptions. And then later in the year, he got better. I think it's going to come down to that. I think if they can turn Milroe over, I think they'll get some short fields and score and be able to win. If Milroe plays clean, I think it's going to be tough for Michigan to win the football game. But I kind of think they're going to turn him over, and they'll be able to win. The second game – the other game, I really have no idea, to be honest. Like, I mean, I think it could be a track meet. If you told me it was also like 28-24, I wouldn't be surprised. Like,
I think this is the game. The expectation is like 42-38, though. Like, I think that's what people.
Yeah, I think so too. But like, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if the running games are more featured in that game than people, and especially since these teams haven't been in this situation before, it wouldn't surprise me if they like just dip their toes in the water and it took a minute for them to get comfortable, and then all of a sudden, kind of as as the game went on in the second half, things started to blow
The second half turns it to be a 28-24 because it was 10-3 at halftime, and then they start scoring. Everybody settles in. Yeah,
I think so because Sark's never coached in a game like this before. Obviously, DeBoer hasn't either. And so I wonder if they just kind of dip their toes in, play really conservative. Washington runs the ball more than people give them credit for with Dylan Johnson. And Texas is the same way. So I almost wonder if the defenses have a little success stopping the run, and then the game opens up a little bit in the second half. And then I think in the Michigan game, if they turn Milroe over, I think they win. If they don't, I think they get beat. So I mean, I think that's probably your game plan. And then national championship wise, we'll just have to see once we get there.
So who has real quick before we close out, I'll just ask you one last question. Who has the most to gain from a national championship win?
Texas, I think. I think Texas, because I think Texas, then you can finally do the we're back thing and nobody laughs at you anymore. And because you have a national title, and Washington would be cool or whatever, but you're changing conferences and all that stuff. And Texas would basically reinsert themselves back into the blue blood conversation, and not
especially heading into the SEC.
Not that they weren't still a blue blood, but they were in the Oklahoma, Nebraska type thing.
USC.
Where they'd been good, but they were historically good, but they weren't currently great. They'd get back into that. Hey, we're Georgia, we're Alabama now. And that's
entering the same conference. On top
of going into the SEC. It's definitely not Alabama. They've done it before, been there, done that. Michigan, maybe if it means that you keep Harbaugh. But honestly, I think that it's a double-edged sword there. I think kind of if you win it, Harbaugh rides into the sunset. He said when he took the job, he wanted to restore Michigan football to its previous glory. I know they haven't won a national title, but it's hard to say that he hasn't lived up to that promise. He has. He's restored Michigan football.
Especially the past 3 years, winning the Big Ten championship and making the playoffs. You've done outside of winning a playoff game or a national championship, you brought it back to where you reset the standard. And so under Jim Harbaugh, if he stays the coach over the next few years, the standard is what the standard was at Ohio State. Hey, beat Ohio State, win the Big Ten championship, and then, we need to compete for a national championship. And so that's been the standard the past 3 years, ever since he's got it to where he wanted to get it. That's what it's been. I hate to say that about Michigan, but that's what it is. Ohio State, Michigan is now turned into their expectation is what we kind of expect from Ohio State. Beat Ohio State, win the Big Ten championship, and compete for a national championship. And maybe hopefully we slip through the cracks, end up in the national championship. And I think that's what Michigan fans are hoping this year. And then you probably like your matchup. If you beat Bama, if you're a Michigan fan and you beat Bama, you feel comfortable playing the winner of Texas, Washington. You easily feel like you can win that game. We could win the national championship. We beat Bama. Bama might be the best team left of the four. We'll see. But if you beat them, you feel comfortable of we beat Bama, one of the hotter teams coming in. And I think we could match up. I like our matchup against Texas. You would like your matchup against Washington. So I think if they win this game, I think they feel really good heading into the national championship. And if Harbaugh wins the national championship and walks off into the sunset and goes back to the NFL, that's a win-win situation for him. That's a win-lose situation for Michigan, because you got all these allegations and stuff like that you're still going to have to deal with, but you get to ride off of winning a national championship. You might not win nothing the next 10 years, but you still, hey, we won a national championship in 2023 or 2024 by the time the national championship will be played. So, Walker, it was great to chop it back up with you. It was great, kind of taking a month off. I appreciate you for joining me and really getting this show kicked off. It's great to be off on a Sunday, talk some football, watch some NFL all day is kind of going to be my focus, and bring in the new year with the family. So we appreciate everybody for tuning in. We appreciate everybody for listening, and we will catch you after these playoff games. We will record at some point to preview the national championship and kind of talk about what we saw on New Year's Day. So we appreciate everybody for tuning in. We appreciate everybody for listening. Catch us on the next episode of Field Stormers.